Chosen one, the hour that was written before your birth has come, and it will not wait. The hush you feel is not coincidence, but the drum of destiny calling you home. They have tried to dim that lamp within you, to convince you that silence is failure. But the same spirit that searched your inward parts has never stopped tending your flame. You have been summoned by a timing older than calendars, and every quiet ache, sleepless night, and whispered nudge has been the map returning you to your true name. Rise with urgency, for this is your appointed season to answer, to reclaim what they could not forever bury. You were guided here because something ancient remembers you and will not be quiet until you remember it back. In the hush, your soul recognizes the contract you made beyond time, and the feeling of finally coming home will settle like a certainty in your bones. Today you are guided to remember divine memory, ignite the inner light waiting within, and step into your soul's purpose through sacred signs, breathwork, and practical alignment for daily life. They cannot take the knowing that rises when you sit in stillness and listen, and that knowing will teach you to translate intuitive nudges into brave, daily choices. Let the intimate work of waking be your quiet rebellion, soft, steady, and unstoppable. What if I told you that the very hesitation and pain you carry are the secret keys to unlocking the life you were promised? They never wanted you to know how audacious your call would be or how fierce the love that anchors it. You have been navigating doubt and the weight of others' expectations while the compass of your inner light has been whispering directions. Now those whispers harden into a command. Move, remember, and serve the light that chose you first. This is a transmission to remind you that what you have endured is not punishment but preparation, and that hidden truths are now breaking open for those brave enough to listen. If this message already speaks to your soul, subscribe, like this video, and comment 77 below. In this video, we will walk you through the rites that reclaim your memory, breathwork, stillness, dream decoding, and the sacred signs that translate inner knowing into fearless action, so you can step into service with love, wisdom, and righteous resolve. Skeptical? Stay anyway, because when the lamp within is rekindled, you will see how precise the timing has been and why nothing about your awakening is accidental. Number 1. The quiet alignment of a hidden thread. In the hush that follows confession and longing, the first stirrings of recognition come like a faint map found folded in the pocket of an old coat, and you realize at once that your life has been stitched to a design that is far older than you imagined. This is not fate as many speak it, but a patient choreography that has followed you through wounds and wonders alike. I want you to hold this truth alongside a lesser-known whisper of Scripture, 2 Chronicles 16 verse 9, which speaks of eyes that run to and fro throughout the earth seeking those whose hearts are fully His, and let that image widen your sense of how attentive the cosmos has been to your inward movements. There are patterns, small and luminous, that have been keeping watch over your steps, and recognizing them is the first initiation of awareness. You are being seen, called, and formed. Comment, I seal this word in light, if you have felt the hush of attention in a place where only loneliness was supposed to be, and imagine what it means when the story you thought was random begins to carry intention and invitation. Ahead lies the slow unspooling of memory and motive, a retrieval that will name what you have always half known and begin to show you why everything felt like a prelude. I dreamt, once, of a room with a single window facing a starless night, and in that dream a voice asked me if I remembered the way you used to hold your breath when truth was near. The question did not accuse but offered a recognition so gentle it felt like a benediction, and in that instant something inside me agreed with a tremor. You have always carried a small holiness that made ordinary things look like sacramental signs, and perhaps you shut it away because the world did not know how to honor such thin light. You have known, in a way that felt more like a body memory than a thought, that your stumbling and your silence were not mistakes but markers on a line that runs deeper than explanation. If this recognition lands like a pebble throwing concentric circles through a still surface, know that those ripples are the first confirmations of alignment, and they reach farther than you perceive. The opening here is not dramatic but intimate, a flash of recognition that will rearrange what you thought was random into a recognizable grammar. Let this dream ask you now, what small mercy of meaning have you been denying because you feared it was only your fancy? The path forward will ask for a patient courage to keep returning to that window even when the night appears empty. There are rooms in the heart carved by confusion, rooms that sometimes feel drafty and unanchored, and you may have learned to attribute those drafts to your own fragility rather than to a passage being cleared for revelation. Sensitivity has felt like a liability, a trembling that exposed you to ridicule or the ache of being outside common measure, and yet that same tenderness is a barometer of spiritual attunement that most never possess. Longing has been your secret teacher, a persistent ache that translated into prayerful absence more than into slogans or tidy answers, and it has led you deeper than surface comforts could ever take you. When you read your life like an old hymn, you will hear intervals of dissonance that made the melody all the more important, and those intervals are not failures but necessary cadences. There is a grief that has been your companion and a curiosity that refused to be shamed into silence, and both have been the quiet engines moving you toward recognition. Allow yourself to name these states without apology, for they are the language through which your deeper purpose has been speaking. In the naming, you begin to feel less like an accident and more like a presence in a long conversation. Consider now that these interior seasons were not random storms but the shaping hand of an unseen architecture, a scaffold built to receive what will one day be revealed, and this reframe changes the nature of suffering and the meaning of rest. Imagine a temple being built stone by patient stone, each grief and each joy placed with intention so that an inner sanctum might be prepared, and recognize that your life has been working toward such construction. There are metaphors in Scripture that speak of houses, tents, and tabernacles as places where heaven and earth touch, and when you read them sideways, you see your own inner habitations being readied for a dwelling of revelation. The idea is not to minimize pain, but to give it a context that honors its necessity, to see that what broke you also made a way for light to enter. This unseen design reframes your past as curriculum rather than punishment, and that shift will change how you carry your memories into the present. You are invited into a posture of stewardship over your interior architecture, to see yourself not as damaged goods but as a sanctuary in progress. This understanding will grow into a map, and soon the landmarks will begin to name themselves. Listen for the subtle signs that have always been there but were muffled by noise. The sudden familiarity of a street you never visited, the identical dream repeated with new detail, the premonitory song that arrives before you meet someone who feels like kin. These déjà vu moments are not mere glitches but echoes that trace a latent route beneath your daily life, and they hum with the possibility of divine ordering. Dreams have been more precise than you granted them permission to be, delivering images that return with new clarity when you are finally ready to understand them, and their symbolism is often a language of retrieval. You have experienced an inner knowing that occurs without rational scaffolding, a certainty that arrives like a hand on the small of your back guiding you forward, and it has been both terrifying and tender. The poetic quality of these signs is their own proof. They do not need to shout because their presence is delicate and persistent. Take note of the coincidences that make your throat tighten with recognition, for they are the breadcrumbs of initiation. Attend to these tiny confirmations, and the map they form will begin to glow with a quieter, truer light. There comes a moment when the intuition that lived as a private companion finally meets evidence in the outer world. And when that meeting occurs, your nervousness settles into a secure calm like the laying of a keel. The unfolding is seldom violent. It arrives as a series of small congruences that line up one after another until you can no longer claim randomness as an explanation. You will feel a steadying under your feet as relationships, opportunities, and inner convictions begin to echo the same tune. And that echo is the universe agreeing with the truth you have carried. Safety does not always mean absence of danger, but it does mean the presence of alignment that affords you a steadier way to act. Grounding comes when you look back and see how persistent threads in your life were forming a braid, and in tracing that braid you reclaim agency. Your heart will breathe differently when it recognizes that its beats have been synchronized to a tempo much larger than immediate circumstance, and from that breath you can move with intention. This confirmation is a quiet covenant between you and the path you were born to walk. As the recognition deepens, you will begin to feel the recovery of an identity that was tucked away under obligation, apology, or the need for survival. It is as though you excavate a buried self that has always been waiting to stand. An archetypal memory surfaces. Images, names, tasks, and temperaments that once felt mythic now step into the room with bearing as ordinary as the light at dawn, and their return is both startling and inevitable. This recovered identity is not the ego making a comeback, but a retrieval of role and resonance that the world has not asked you to be until now. In the intimacy of this recovery, you will recognize patterns of call and gifting that align with ancient types: prophet, healer, witness, in ways that feel less like costume and more like kinship. There is an uncanny recognition in meeting these archetypes inside yourself, as if you are greeting an elder relative whose face you knew before you knew their name. Let this process be tender. It is an unwrapping rather than a performance, and it will ask for patience and reverence. The remembrance deepens the invitation and supplies the vocabulary you lack to declare what you are becoming. Now the first activation begins not as a trumpet blast, but as a careful choosing to steward sensitivity into action. And this step is both small and sovereign in its importance. Embrace your hunger for truth as a lever that can move stubborn blocks of fear, and let your wisdom, however quiet, become the compass by which you decide your next work. To be activated is to say yes to the small tasks that feel aligned. Listen longer, speak with fewer words, hold space without needing to fix, and to build muscle in the soft ways that real power often arises. Courage will be required because this path asks you to show up without the usual props of certainty. But the courage asked for is more akin to faith than bravado. Begin to practice discernment with your tenderness. Allow your sensitivity to be a shield rather than a wound by training it into boundaries and sacred attention. This initiation into action is deliberate and measured, not frantic, and it will be the first real proof that alignment is moving from idea to embodiment. When you step, even tentatively, you will discover that the ground you feared was thin is steadier than you imagined. You have arrived at a point where arrival itself is a revelation, and you can say with peace that your coming here was no accident but a rhythm in which many things conspired to bring you to awareness. Claim this arrival without grandiosity and with a gentleness that honors the cost it took. Let the quiet victory sit like a crown upon the places that were once raw. Comment, "I carry the silence as crown," if you feel the solemn joy of being chosen to hold stillness as a form of leadership. And know that such silence will be your authority more than any loud claim. There is a soft tension now that propels us forward. It is the sense that something larger is still aligning and that the next movement will require both courage and the steadiness cultivated so far. In this pause between recognition and action, listen for the voice that will call the next step, because the language it uses will be both ancient and intimate, and it will ask for a response that is wholehearted. Ahead lies the fuller map, but first you must be willing to wear the quiet as regalia and to move from initiation into engagement. What we do here every day is possible because of the few who choose to be keepers of this light. I thank them now, one by one, in the silence of my heart. If you want to be part of this circle and receive what cannot be spoken in public, join. The portal is below. Number 2, the quiet siege. In this second turn, the story tightens. A hush falls over places that once echoed with promise, and in that hush, the chosen one first feels the small, insistent tug of obstruction. An origin story of resistance that smells of old sin and ancient accusation. The revelation arrives like a pinch of salt on the tongue, an inexplicable bitterness that refuses to dissolve, and it carries with it echoes of Zechariah 3, where an accuser waited at the priest's side until an angel spoke and stripped the shame away. You are seeing now how accusation gathers like moths around a new flame. This is not merely bad timing or disappointment. It is a pattern worth naming. A choreography of sabotage that began before your name was properly spoken into the world. Listen, there are currents beneath the surface that have always diverted your steps, and the recognition of those currents is an invitation to wake. Comment, "I walk crowned by eternal flame," if you feel the stirrings of righteous indignation reclaiming you. And as you feel that crown press into your brow, know that pressure will either bruise or birth what comes next. A first clarity arrives as a discomfort too familiar to be new, a pressure behind the breastbone that announces itself in dreams and momentary dizziness, as if the air around you has remembered an old treaty and is now renegotiating. This hits intimate and raw because it suggests something has been working against you before you knew who you were, as though your destiny cast a shadow that drew opposition like iron draws storms. The sensation is unforgettable. It sits beneath ordinary sorrow and feels almost like a memory of a wound you never saw inflicted. It is unsettling because it forces the mind to consider intention behind chance, to reclassify what once seemed random as a coordinated pressure. As you name it, your body registers both fear and a small private recognition, a fierce hope that this is not madness but message. That recognition is the beginning of a strategy, and the strategy requires you to keep watching. When the sting of rejection and shame presses down, it is as if your soul has been thumbed by someone who knows your most tender scars and chooses them like counting beads. Rejection becomes a grammar in relationships where your words are misheard on purpose and your presence is treated like a threat, not a gift. Shame is applied like varnish to your memories until you begin to squint and wonder if the light ever belonged to you. Manipulation arrives with a velvet hand and a hidden knife, and isolation tastes of salt because your nearest companions retreat with implausible excuses. These experiences cut in ways that are not always visible but leave a pattern of lowered expectation and a readiness to apologize for being. I will name it plainly. You were taught to make yourself small so others could feel safe, and that lesson became a reflex in moments your spirit needed to stand tall. This paragraph holds the sorrow of those lessons and also honors the courage it takes to feel them fully without flinching. Let the admission itself be medicine. You are allowed to be wounded and to mourn what you thought you deserved. Beneath these interpersonal slights lie structures and forces older than the people who carry them, architectures of power and superstition that have learned to speak in polite tones while diverting your ascendancy. Imagine an exile not of geography but of soul, a wilderness walk where unseen hands rearrange the map every time you set your foot toward the promised land. That ancient script repeats like wind through the tent flaps of memory. These hidden currents are sacred ground, places where the battle is not gossip or grievance but covenant, where spirits that value stasis murmur their doctrines into ears that once heard the voice of calling. Call it a wilderness test, as ancient as Israel's wandering, and know that every trial is a sacrament of sorting. What will you carry forward and what must be left behind in the sand? The sacredness of this hidden battle means your suffering is not cheap or arbitrary. It is a refining, delivered by systems that often do not acknowledge the humanity of the one they press. Naming the structures gives them shape and therefore makes them survivable. Once seen, they can be confronted with prayer, strategy, and community. Sacred war is neither glamorous nor simple. It is the slow, precise work of reclaiming contested territory within and around you. When you turn back like someone finally fanning a dark room, patterns jump into relief with the glare of truth. Betrayals that followed the same script, delays that came at moments of greatest breakthrough, and people whose presence always took and never returned. You see that the same friendship that blossomed into warmth also contained a slow appetite for your edges, a careful trimming of who you might become. The repetition is cruelly elegant. It looks like coincidence until your eyes adjust and you notice the seams. Once revealed, these patterns help you stop apologizing for perception. They give you a radar for the subtle predators of progress. There is grief in that looking back. Grief for trust misplaced, grief for time given to gardeners who stole your seed. But there is also dignity because you now have a witness to your story besides your doubting self. That witness, once summoned, will not let you walk blindly into another set of hands that have always loved only what you could supply. Let this light keep burning. It will guide the next move. The spiritual resistance you encounter is not always visible as an enemy with a face. It often arrives as fog, watchers at the threshold, doors that close without explanation, and currents that deflect the trajectory you prayed for. Picture yourself moving toward a window and finding, again and again, that glass has been smeared with a subtle film that makes the view soft and indistinct, as if someone wanted you to give up looking. These distortions gather around your brightest moments, like predators circling the glow of a lantern, attracted by what might expose them. Know that your light itself can attract distortion because it threatens the comfortable narratives others have constructed. When you shine, the false schemes tremble and lash out. Spiritual sabotage can take the form of belittlement, of whispers that thin your resolve. It can wear the face of charity while sawing the branch you stand upon. Recognize the patterns as energetic, not merely personal, and you reclaim the capacity to respond, not react. This discernment is a weapon and a bomb. It allows you to reposition rather than to collapse. How did you meet such pressure? Many of you met it by diminishing, by learning to make yourselves background so other people could remain the story's comfortable protagonists. Some of you adopted people-pleasing as armor, thinking apology would open doors that hostility closed, and in that trade you misplaced your center. Others answered by rebelling, by becoming loud, by proving your value so hard that it repelled the very allies you needed, because anger felt safer than vulnerability. None of these were mistakes to be ashamed of. They were survival strategies, adaptations in a landscape of threat. This paragraph is an invitation to hold those choices without condemnation, to see them as weathered responses to real storms. In understanding how you coped, you stop repeating the same failed tactics unconsciously and begin to choose based on courage, not on fear. Your past strategies were temporary tools. You can set them down now and pick up instruments of reclamation. A turn arrives when you begin to reinterpret resistance not as proof of failure, but as confirmation that you are on a path that matters, because only what is powerful enough to disturb the status quo receives such opposition. This is the pivot from victim to prophet, from passive endurance to active reclamation. It feels like a tightening of the jaw and a lifting of the chin at once. You give back the stolen voice not by argument but by recognition. So you opposed me. Now I see why. That clarity restores authority. It reminds you that force met you because you would not be quieted. Prophetically, you can now declare your boundaries and reclaim rituals that were stolen. Names, times, sacred spaces, vows to self. The energy flips, resistance becomes witness, sabotage becomes evidence. In this transmutation, the fire refines rather than devours. You are formed harder and clearer. Now hear this as a plain and burning truth. They opposed you because you carried power, and opposition is the universe's blunt testament to your capacity to change things. Comment, I move guarded by divine fire, if you accept opposition as evidence and not as indictment, if you will let difficulty be the anvil where your destiny is forged rather than the shackles that keep you small. Let this realization settle like a seed behind your breastbone, a secret warmth that will germinate strategies, alliances, and a firmer voice. What comes next is not merely resistance turned to strength, but a gathering of allies and a sharpening of purpose. And that is the next movement in the story. Every word, every image you receive here is an offering. If you feel this word has touched you today, you can honor it with a sign, right here below with a donation through the Super Thanks button. It is a small gesture, but it opens great doors. Number 3, seeing the hidden thread. In this third circle, the chosen one begins to read the weave beneath events. A thin, luminous filament that ties accident to appointment and sorrow to secret instruction. And suddenly the familiar world feels annotated by meaning. Where once you moved through life thinking things simply happened, a new intelligence begins to corral moments into meaning, and the air seems to carry a faint script that only the newly initiated can decipher. Consider the ancient practice of the Urim and Thummim, Exodus 28 verse 30. Numbers 27:21. Relics of a divining logic consulted to reveal choice and direction. A biblical echo of how the world itself bears answers if one learns its language. Allow this idea to soften you. There are instruments, not always visible, that light the way, and remembering them is part of remembering who you are. Comment, I rise marked by the divine, if you sense a mark or a stirring that refuses to be explained away. And please share a personal reflection. A dream, a memory, a challenge, or an inner knowing related to this message so our community can recognize the pattern together. The veil thins here, and what was once merely hinted now begins to declare itself. A sudden internal shift unfurls like a curtain drawn back at dawn, and you realize a memory that once felt random now threads into a single luminous meaning, soaked in a color you had long since forgotten to name. Where there had been static, a frequency arrives and the world rearranges itself along an axis you had only half sensed before, aligning faces, dates, and small gestures into a coherent pattern that feels like homecoming. Synchronicities that once felt like coincidence line up with unnerving exactness. Names, numbers, and tiny repeated images colliding into a map whose lines are older than your calendar and truer than rumor. You do not invent clarity. You inherit it, and the inheritance feels both ancient and immediate, like receiving back a voice you had been holding in without knowing its words. An inner lens sharpens and the everyday becomes saturated with signals that were always there but unseen, each one a waypoint in the geography of initiation that asks for a response. This is not paranoia but a purge of fog, a permission to read the punctuation in your life and to follow the places where meaning presses insistently against the membrane of routine. In that first bright hour, you're seeing changes, and with it, the shape of what you will answer to, which in turn reshapes the very language you will use to pray and to act. Beneath the visible lies a grammar of things. Numbers that repeat like a chorus, phrases that haunt the margins of your thoughts, and patterns like lattices beneath the skin of days that knit moments into destiny. You begin to perceive a coded conversation, as if life had been leaving scrolls in places you had once walked without reading, small talismans of instruction left where your feet would later stand. Dreams move from random cinema to messages, and even silence carries punctuation when you learn to attend, revealing commas and stops and the cadence of warnings and welcome alike. Think of divine geometry, the spiral, the seed, the ratio that appears in leaf and galaxy, each a signature of intelligence binding micro to macro in a single law of proportion. There are sacred numbers, yes, and not merely for curiosity. They act as cartographers for the soul, guiding intention and timing through hidden algorithms of grace and consequence. When you name a recurring symbol, you cut through fog. When you trace a repeated number, you unlock the cadence of guidance and begin to speak back in the language the world understands. The code beneath the surface is not a puzzle to solve for pride, but a language to learn that will teach you where to stand and when to move in accordance with a wisdom older than history. Inside you, sensations sharpen into instruments. A gut like a compass, a pulse that measures truth, a quiet authority that refuses false alignment and dismisses the charades of habit. Boundaries that previously blurred now draw themselves in vivid ink, and you find it easier to say no to what would hollow you out, because your refusal carries a moral and spiritual weight you had not known you owned. Your dreams acquire edges, moods, and direct addresses. Your mornings arrive with clearer instructions and rarer second-guessing, and decisions carry the gravity of rights rather than options. Energy responds to you differently. Crowds seem to rearrange, conversations weigh differently, and your presence begins to carry a note that the atmosphere cannot ignore, as if the air itself learns to salute. This intensification is not vanity but confirmation, a ledger closing on what does not belong and opening on what does, creating a moral economy that clarifies desire from destiny. You notice how old fears lose their grip when met with the steady diplomacy of your new sensing, and how small triumphs build invisible scaffolding that supports bolder steps. As the inner signs intensify, so does the courage to live in accordance with what you now unmistakably receive. And this courage translates into daily acts that accumulate into new identity. Outside, the world begins to mirror the interior shift, as if the cosmos rearranges to honor the new frequency you inhabit and to give you the environment in which your truth can be practiced. People pivot away or toward you with a kind of inevitability. Colleagues, lovers, and strangers become the reflecting glass for your change, offering tests and confirmations in equal measure that demand discernment and compassion. Doors you once pushed on now swing open without your force, and other entrances bolt tight as a test of resolve, each lock asking if you will be faithful to the new direction or be tempted to old compromises. Opportunities appear like cartographers inked into place, each offering a coordinate that aligns with the geometry of your awakening and demanding choices that will calibrate your course. Resistance also intensifies, not as punishment but as confirmation that what rises in you asks to be separated from lesser claims, and the friction itself polishes the truth until it shines. There is a divine architecture to this rearrangement, where walls fall where they must and bridges are built where you are ready to cross, as if some unseen mason lays each stone in time. To live through this external alignment is to feel the slow, sure hand of providence that reshapes circumstance to match destiny, even when the work requires patient and stubborn faith. Memory wakes not as linear recall but as a flowering of encoded knowing that floods the chest like a tide of salt and light, bringing with it the fragrances of places you had not realized you had visited. You find ancestral voices bending toward you in dream phrases, and childhood images reframed as initiation marks rather than accidents, each detail now a sigil of instruction that reframes your biography as sacrament. You are chosen, not because you are different from the world, but because you remember the part of the world that calls you to restore it. Subscribe if you haven't yet, like this video, and comment "I am chosen" to let this message anchor in your soul. For full prophetic revelations daily, join the membership via the link in the description. Your spiritual path deserves more than fragments. Step into the full light. And if this message moved you deeply, consider tapping the Super Thanks button to support the mission. Every Super Thanks fuels the light we're spreading together. Rise now and carry the light unashamed.